Welcome to Mountain Roots Explores. I'm Josh. Frankfort, Kentucky is a place where history runs as deep as the Kentucky River itself, where bourbon isn't just a drink, it's a way of life. If bourbon is a religion here, then Buffalo Trace Distillery is its cathedral. And like any cathedral, it's steeped in history, tradition, and just a hint of mystery. Long before Frankfort was a town, before the bourbon and the riverboats, this spot was just a ford across the Kentucky River. It was a crucial crossing along one of the great Buffalo Trails, nature's highways back in colonial America. English explorers first set foot here in the 1750s, drawn by the same river that would later shape the town's destiny. Legend has it, this place got its name in 1780 after a pioneer named Stephen Frank met his end in a skirmish with Native Americans. They called it Frank's Ford in his memory, and when the Virginia legislature decided to carve out a town on this site in 1786, they named it Frankfort. A few years later, in 1792, Kentucky became a state, and this little town by the river was chosen as its capital. It's one of those stories that reminds you just how deeply history is woven into the fabric of this place. Before the bourbon, before the politics, there was the river, the land, and the people who crossed here. First the buffalo, then the settlers, and finally, everyone who built this town into what it is today. Frankfort might be small, but it's had its moments on the big stage of American history. One of those moments was the Lewis and Clark expedition, their epic journey westward in 1803 that would shape the future of the nation. Before they set off on their great adventure, Lewis made a stop here in Frankfort, gathering supplies and meeting with Clark's family. It's fascinating to think about Lewis on the cusp of one of the most legendary explorations in American history, walking these very streets, possibly having a drink in one of these local taverns. Frankfort was a brief but important waypoint on their journey, a place where plans were laid and the future of the American frontier began to take shape. The Kentucky River wasn't just a lifeline for the town, it was a gateway to the unknown. And for a brief moment, Frankfort was at the center of it all, connecting the past with the promise of the vast, untamed West. To some people, Frankfort might just be a dot on a map, an afterthought in the shadow of Louisville or Lexington. But spend a little time here and you'll realize this small town has a spirit all its own. This is a place where the past is never too far away, where the whispers of history can be heard in every glass of bourbon poured, and where the river has always been the lifeblood of the community. In the early days, bourbon barrels were rolled right down these streets, headed for the river. Back then, the Kentucky River was a vital artery for commerce. Bourbon wasn't just crafted here, it was shipped from here, bound for markets near and far. The river carried more than just barrels of whiskey, it carried the hopes and dreams of the people who called this place home. It's easy to forget now, but before highways and railroads, rivers were everything. This river connected Frankfort to the rest of the world. And bourbon? Well, bourbon connected Frankfort to the world's taste buds. Buffalo Trace. This is hallowed ground. The distillery's been around for over 200 years, surviving fires, floods, and prohibition. They don't just make bourbon here, they make history. Walking through these buildings, you can almost feel the presence of those who came before. The generations of craftsmen who've perfected their art, one barrel at a time. This is where the magic happens. The bourbon sits in these barrels for years, soaking in the flavors of the charred oak, breathing in the Kentucky air. It's a slow process, a patient process. But that's the thing about bourbon. It can't be rushed. The best things never can. The thing about Frankfort is, it's not just about the bourbon. This place is steeped in history, from the grandiose Capitol building to the humble riverbank that's seen more than its fair share of triumphs and tragedies. But bourbon, it's the thread that ties it all together. Once upon a time, when steamboats lined the docks, carrying passengers and goods up and down the river, the waterways were the lifeblood of this place. There's something about standing here by the river that makes you feel connected to something bigger. This river has carried so much: goods, people, dreams, and it's still here, still flowing, just like it always has. But Frankfort isn't just a place stuck in time. It's alive. The bourbon you drink here tastes different. It's got the weight of history behind it, sure, but it's also got something more. It's got the spirit of this town, the people who've worked these stills, walked these streets, and watched the river roll by. To Frankfort, a town that's given the world so much more than it gets credit for. Here's to the river, to the bourbon, and to the people who make it all happen. Cheers.